Hello and welcome to another episode of Off the Rock with me, John Ferguson. And today we're joined by Lachie from Scrumbags Pod once again at rugby.com.au. Lachie, not victors this weekend after coming off the weekend, but definitely you can be a Wallaby supporter with a bit of pride in the jersey, actually with a lot of pride in the jersey, and probably very happy about how things are building. But how are you feeling and how are things looking after that weekend's result?
Oh, Fergo, thanks for having me back firstly. And I'm feeling good. I'm feeling really positive. There's a lot of pride in the gold jersey, as you mentioned, at the moment. And that comes off the back of a good win from the girls. But we'll start with the blokes. And again, I don't think anyone's head down after that performance in Cape Town. Again, a game that we were right in and probably could have taken at the end, had some kicks gone over and some passes been held. So a fascinating game to chew through with you, mate.
Yeah, I'm really keen to get your thoughts on what the game was like. We are, as you mentioned, we're going to talk about the Wallaroos as well in their thumping victory over Samoa in the World Cup. Obviously, a very important win for them to get, especially considering the absolute thumping that England gave the US in their game. So, the pool is looking very set with the middle set to be decided. So, keen to rip into that at the end as well. But we will go into the Wallabies game first. And I watched it once in the morning, and then I watched it again on reflection last night slash this morning. We're recording this Monday afternoon, and I just think that it was, as you mentioned, a lot of opportunities lost for the Wallabies, but I think also there were some of them which were actually self manufactured. Like those misses were our own fault. And I'm keen to get your take on where you saw that the Wallabies perhaps struggled the most throughout the game, because it wasn't necessarily a positive game as it was in game one. It was a little bit more of a scrappy game, and that's probably due to the wet field. But yeah, where do you think the Wallabies kind of struggled more in this game than they did in the first one?
Tactically, pure and simple, Fergo. We both called a Springboks a backlash of sorts, if you like. We expected players like Andre Pollard to come back in and steer the ship from their boot, and steer it they did. It was a masterclass from the Springbok 10 to get them around the park. And conversely, when Nick White went down in the 11th minute, we lost our primary kicker. James O'Connor, not a noted boot, as we discussed last week. And ultimately, I think that's where the game was decided quite early. The score and the Wallabies managed to find ways to get back into it, but the way that Pollard controlled proceedings, took to the air and sent Cheslin Colby after it. Colby had minimal impact, I thought, with ball in hand, but my goodness, he was such an effective kick chase weapon, and the Wallabies rarely were allowed any clean ball on the kick receiver on the counter. So really smart rugby from the Springboks, a reversion to their two World Cup winning styles, and a much needed win for them.
No, it would have been pandemonium had they lost two on the trot at home to the Wallabies, which would have been, as you and I mentioned in the preview, I don't know when that happened last time. So it's good for them to get a win. We will get into the Springboks in just a moment, but I think, as you mentioned there, the Wallabies quite struggled tactically, and it looked a lot like James O'Connor was just trying to get wide as early as possible. And I think that only worked last weekend in Johannesburg after the Wallabies had earned it by going through the middle and really being direct. And we often talked about this season so far that you could throw a blanket over the majority of the Wallabies players. That wasn't really the case for the Wallabies in this game. They did play very wide. They tried to get expansive quite early. When you've got guys like Max Jorgensen and Corey Toole on the wings, that's obviously where you want to get the ball to with them in space. But you've got to create that space, and you've got to earn earn the right to go wide. So I did feel strategically they did struggle. Obviously, the injuries to players like Tom Wright and Nick White were extremely impactful, and it was particularly the boot of Nick White where we probably didn't get the right amount of kicking or the right types of kicks. And that just comes down to personnel. And with someone like Tom Wright being absent from the back, you just give the opposition the confidence to be able to kick to the backfield and potentially not be as fearful about losing, missing tackles or having them run the ball back, especially when you've got Tom Wright linking up with the players like Max Jorgensen and Corey Toole. So the kicking was a big aspect of that. But obviously, we saw that become an issue as well when we weren't getting any line out pay as well. And that struggled as well. What did you make of the set piece? Because scrum wise, we did a lot better than I thought we were gonna do. Well done to Zane Nongor. Well done to Tom Robertson. Obviously, Angus Bell and Taniela Tupou were the cornerstones of their respective scrums. But how did you view that set piece battle? Because it was something that you and I spoke about in the preview.
Yeah, 100%. I was really impressed. You mentioned the reserves coming on, but geez, Tanela Tupou has really found himself in these past few weeks. Coming back from that First Nations game, his run since then has been excellent. It's no mean feat scrumming against the Ox, as we know, and to keep them to relative parity was impressive. But you're right, just the little errors. It doesn't look like it's too bad on the score sheet, but it felt like there was more than 2 lost lineouts from the Wallabies. The ball just wasn't clean. And yes, it was slippery, it was greasy, really disgusting, sort of like a clay underfoot. It was hard to get traction and get around. But Nick Frost just finding it a little difficult in those conditions. And surprisingly, I think that the loss of Harry Wilson at line-out time, who's become a really prominent taker at the set piece, his absence, I think, was keenly felt. Rob Valentini, while he was excellent in his return with ball in hand, incredibly not up to the same standard as jumping as Harry Wilson has become in a rapid amount of time. So I think that's where it cost us a little. Billy Pollard, I'm still iffy on his set piece. We're really missing the assurity of David Parecki's throw now that he's retired. And I wonder how long that position is safe for Pollard. BPA I thought brought a lot of impact and a lot of energy coming on, but when Matt Fesler's fit, there's going to be a real 3-way tussle for that position at set piece. What else stood out to you in this game, Fergo? What were the key areas the Wallabies might look back on with a hint of regret?
The aerial game continues to be an issue for them. It really does. They are just not getting their timing quite right. And there were a couple of moments or a couple of high balls where they weren't actually grabbing for the ball. They were in the contest, but it didn't look like they were truly going to catch the ball. There were a couple of bat backs and a couple of shoulders to the ball that just it didn't look. They weren't in the right position to catch it. So a lot of work's gonna have to go into that. We know that Corey Toole and Max Jorgensen have that in their game and can do it, but Boks at their own home ground in Cape Town just managed to know the pitch a little bit better. But it was also quite frustrating to see that someone like Len Ikitau again had to be used so much, where we have such a good person with ball in hand like Joseph Akuso Suaalii, and it's actually more of a indictment on the way that the Wallabies are trying to use Joseph as opposed to where I think positionally. There's a lot of chat now that with Tom Wright out, is it time for Joseph to switch back to fullback is he out to go to the wing with Max Jorgensen to go fullback? A lot of people are saying they don't want to make lots of changes to fit one player in. A lot of them say that Joseph Akuso Suaalii is, the best choice because teams won't want to kick to him because he's such an aerial threat and such a threat with ball in hand. I think that I think he should stick in the centers, keep the continuity going, and just try to get him in the game a little bit more because he is obviously a very big body. He is someone that can do a lot of damage with the ball in hand, but without him getting involved with the ball in hand, he's making some mistakes with the ball making some mistakes without the ball in hand. So on defensive pressure at the ruck, he got pinged once for sealing off. So it's just about finding the right way to get such an explosive and dangerous weapon into the game. And I just felt that Lenny Kitau, he was one of the top carriers yet again. He's just having to do a mountain of work. He's doing it extremely well. But I just think we can use that backline a little bit better because we have such great threats out wide. What we'll do now, we'll go straight into stocks rising and stocks falling for the Wallabies, as a whole for the Springboks mini series, the 2 matches heading into Argentina. So, give me who are your stocks falling from this series? Let's start there. We'll start with the negative and end with a positive.
That's a tough one to find a clear stocks falling out of the tour because I think overall, if you would have predicted Australia to come back with 5 competition points, you'd take that any day if someone said that's what we were going to get. So not too many people falling. I think the players like Nick Champion de Crepney, who's been offered limited minutes and limited time, he only got 5 minutes across this, and just the way that he fits into a Joe Schmidt 23, I'm not sure whether he's going to be that guy going forward. Big and abrasive. We've both sung his praises about his defensive work and his line-out capability, but I'm not sure how he's going to fit in against the Argentinians and especially against the All Blacks. So if anyone, it's probably him just for the limited minutes. Outside of that, I think Billy Pollard's probably the one at
Yeah,
suspect here, as we
I'm
mentioned
with you
before,
there.
just the accuracy of throw.
Mm,
Nothing against his work rate. He can carry really strongly, a lot of upside, but
yeah.
as a test hooker, you simply must be nailing your throws. That's why we had such a lot of faith in Dave Parecki during his admittedly limited Wallabies
Mm.
career because he was so accurate at the set piece. So I'd probably highlight those two, but it's hard to pick many others. Have you got an alternate for me?
No, I just think on Billy Pollard, I just want to say that I'm writing a piece at the moment for Rugby Pass about the stocks rising players. And as you're right, it is very hard to pick out the stocks falling because we've been so impressive as a collective unit across these two games where no one gave us any sort of a chance. And we've come away with one win and a very narrow loss, albeit just missing out on a bonus point there in the second game. But Billy Pollard for me, he's been off the back of a tremendous Super Rugby Pacific campaign with the Brumbies. He just hasn't been able to secure that line out game. And as you say, the line out throw is almost the end all or be all. And I don't think Brandon Payne-Amosa's accuracy is necessarily too much better percentage wise than what Billy Pollard is throwing. But at some point, you just got to change something. And it's not too much of a change because you probably just put one back to the bench and one starting and just give that a little bit of rotation. So, put Brandon Payne-Amosa on starting, have Billy Pollard finish. You're right, his work rate is tremendous, but it's now I'm looking over the last 5 games. So that's the 3 British and Irish Lions games and the 2 in South Africa. We had 100% line out accuracy in only one game, and that was when Dave Parecki started in the second Lions game. And apart from that, it's been Billy Pollard, Matt Fesler, or Brandon Payne-Amosa, all being that combination of hookers. And it's been no higher than 86%. It's been 80, 86%, 76% around those kind of percentages. So meanwhile, the Springboks got 100% line out success on the weekend. So it is really one of those things which you do want to see improve because we've been so good at the defensive line out with the likes of Nick Frost and also Tom Hooper. We know can do that as well as Jeremy Williams. So it is really encouraging that side of it. We just need to make sure that we win our own ball. Uh, as far as stocks rising, who do you got for me there? Because I know there's a lot, but let's keep it to 3 each or something like that. Because otherwise, we could go through the whole team 1 to 23.
Yeah, it's a hugely tough ask. I think the first person you have to call out is Max Jorgensen. Again, off the back of being one of Australia's best performers for the Lions series, he's taken it to yet another level. A huge
Mm,
performance again in Cape Town to back up his Ellis Park heroics. Just the presence of mind and his ability to just find himself in the right place at the right time. James O'Connor's cross kick in the 43rd minute was a bit of a wobbly old deal, but somehow there's enough pressure and Jorgo is there. He's a natural footy player with a great sense and a feel for the game, and his ability to turn without losing pace is really important.
mm,
Not just in his evasiveness, but his ability to hang on to pills and run that crucial line. So I think his stocks are higher than ever after this tour, and provided he remains injury free, which is a tough thing at the moment. I think he'll be on a very good track to nail that 14 jersey for a while, perhaps
mm.
even the 15. I'm not sure what they're
Yeah.
going to do with that fullback position, but he's certainly someone you consider alongside Suolei, potentially an Andrew
Mm,
Kellaway. I'd love to sort of get your ear on that a bit later in the episode.
mm,
Up front, I think Nick Frost is probably one that we could have picked after Ellis Park. In his
mm.
performance, this wasn't bad, but I think in the
No.
forwards, you've got to give a credit again to Fraser McWright. The
Yep.
work rate is second to none. He did a really good
Mm,
job against the odds, wearing the captain's armband. And for all the pressure that was put on him through Super Rugby by Carlo Tizzano, there is no denying that this is the Wallaby Seven for the foreseeable future, in my opinion. So those have been my two. Who was a couple more that you could throw out?
uh, yeah, I mean, I just want to say on Max Jordan quickly because I will agree with that, but it won't be one of my picks. He, I think I wrote like maybe from very early, like after the Fiji game, and then also like after the first Lions game. It's like I don't think people understand how good this kid is. Like he is tremendous. The fact that you are outshining the rest of the Wallabies backline as well as the forward pack with the likes of Skelton and stuff like that. and you can do this at the age of 20. I think, I've been seeing other podcasters, other videos, other hosts being like, wow, Max Jorgensen, like I had no idea how good he was. And I think that that was kind of what we felt last year when we were kind of like, we don't really, like, before Twickenham and stuff like that. But then we saw him at the start of Super Rugby again, and then he started doing that stuff. So we were expecting this kind of stuff even after last year's his kind of reintroduction to the squad with the against the Springboks. He just made things look effortless, and he was doing the exact same thing as he was doing in schoolboy videos at test level. And that's when you've got an absolute freak athlete. So I just think that people can't overhype Max Jorgensen enough at the moment. He is worth every single bit of video footage, every bit of highlight reel. He's just absolutely tremendous. I'll chuck another one at you. I think that Tom Hooper has come such a long way throughout the Super Rugby Pacific competition, then being able to transfer that form from provincial rugby straight into test match footy, and he's doing repeatability in a game and throughout a season and game to game is something which proves that you really are in form and that you are really really up cutting up amongst the best of the best. And he is absolutely ruthless in his execution and his ability to be aggressive. And, he went toe to toe with the likes of Emnet Sabeth, Marco van Staden, Quagga Smith. He did not take a step back against the Springboks. And I just think that if you look at where he was in 2023, and he was a lamb to slaughter, and then now he really is only at the tender age of 24 for a back row player. He is such an amazing talent. And I just think that he has had such good form, along with his raw measurements of 199 centimeters and 122 kilograms. He's actually playing so well that I think that this actually may warrant a very serious discussion about the Wallabies back row, because we saw what Rob Valentini did on the weekend. Highest carry meters for a forward, most carries for the Wallabies, tremendous post contact meters. And it's just one of those things that Joe Schmidt's going to have a really careful think about it, that what a pack looks like with the back five, if you have Will Skelton in there, as well as wanting to fit Rob Valentini in there somewhere. I'm not sure what the answer is, but Tom Hooper has played so well that I think he warrants some sort of conversation about what the makeup of that back row looks like. And then now I want to get your take on, this is neither a stocks rising, stocks falling, but a stocks unknown sort of thing. James O'Connor. I think that he is the third choice starter behind Loloseo. We're not going to see him again for the rest of the year. Behind Tom Liner, who obviously had a HIA, and we hope that he's back from this Argentina leg. And then we have Ben Donaldson went out with an adductor strain, but we heard that he was going to start behind James O'Connor anyway on the bench for the game one, even if he hadn't had that adductor strain. So where does James O'Connor sit now? Because by no means were either of his games flawless. He did make a fair few mistakes and a few bad passes. And he did miss some crucial kicks, would have at least landed us a bonus point if he landed just one of them on the weekend. So talk to me a little bit about Jock, because it is an interesting place for the Wallabies to be playing. I'd like to see any nation play with their fourth choice starting fly half, and it does warrant a conversation. So I want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, and quickly, I agree on Tom Hooper, a great third pick, easily in our top three back row, and suits it perfectly as a jumping six. So great shout from you. On Rabs, fascinating selection coming up with Australia preparing for a two-leg home series against Argentina. You would expect Tom Liner to be fit and available after a lengthier stand, and he has had 3 concussions this year, so that's going to play into it. But by all reports, he will be available and ready to play in Townsville in that first game in 2 weeks' time. I expect Tom Liner, if fit and available, to return to the starting side with James O'Connor as the backline cover for him. Or have those two as the primary options. The reason for that is O'Connor's experience. Clearly, he's capable of throwing the good passes, hitting the kicks that matter. With those 3 at the end of the 30-22 loss in Cape Town, you could just see that he was off. He came up really sore from a tackle. I think it was in the tackle of Cheslin Colby, and he came up holding his knee. I wasn't sure if it was an impact thing.
I think it was his
looked like he was
ankle.
going to come off.
Yeah.
Ankle. There you go. So something going on on a kicking leg, and you can't expect someone to step up and deliver. I think it was really tough on him to have to take those 3 kicks, and Tane Edmed probably should have been called upon, but a massive challenge for a bloke in his first real test, first time with any decent paddock minutes anyway to go out and kick in a high pressure game against the world champs. So flip a coin there. What can you do? O'Connor, for mine, with the stocks flat, I think he just has to stay in the match day squad. Ben Donaldson, we don't have a ETA on his return.
Mm,
And with no Noah Lolosio and Tane Edmed still very much in his infancy, I think you
mm.
need O'Connor's experience against the Pumas because, as we've seen, they are no easy beats. They put on a fantastic performance against the All Blacks, and I think we're going to need all the cool older heads we can handle. How would you put him into a 23 if you are going to have him into a 23 against the Pumas?
Yeah, I think on the bench is probably a good idea if Tom Liner is very much fit. One of the biggest interest points for me on the weekend was that James O'Connor appeared to stay at 10 and Tane Edmund went to 12. I feel like that was really weird, particularly because James O'Connor has played 12 before and Tane Edmund hasn't, from what we've seen at the super level. So just a bit of a bizarre, like obviously I get that you want to keep your playmakers together, so Tate and Jock, but it just felt like that was an unnatural or awkward way to wedge Payne in there. But he did a very good job, and I'm just happy that he got through more minutes than he did in his first cap, and he played really well, really good in the air, toughed out a lot of tackles, and even went straight really hard at Oxen Che and Eben Etzebeth. So really happy about how he went. Before we move on to maybe some things in the future, I just want to wrap up this South Africa piece by talking about the Springboks and just saying that the Springboks, and I want to get your take as well, the Springboks should, and I think are extremely disappointed with the way that they bocklashed, as you put it, and a lot of people have been putting it. That is not the response that anyone in South Africa would have wanted, or the fashion or style of winning. They went so deep to the well. They went back to straight up World Cup winning rugby. They threw all sort of entertainment factor out of the equation and just said, how are we going to grind the Wallabies down? We're going to take the threes. We're going to hoist the box kick. Andre Pollard was literally the QB in the sense that all he did was they shift back to him and he kicked it. I don't remember seeing him run the ball. I don't remember him throwing any particularly good passes. He was literally just stand, deliver, and kick. And I think that revision to that sort of conservative rugby really is a huge sign of respect to the Wallabies, and because the Springboks were a little bit unsure about what they were doing. But if I'm a Springbok supporter, I am more nervous about this than the first game. The first game was like you flip a coin on some of those intercepts slash missed plays by the Springboks, and they scored down the other end, and it could have been quite an ugly score against the Wallabies. But this game, we lost our starting 9, our starting 15, and we had to reshuffle our backline, putting a 10, 12, 13 combination together that never played before. And all of a sudden, it's an 8-point game. And I know that they were missing the likes of Peter Steph Toy, Sia Khaleesi, but they regularly speak about in South Africa being 4 deep. And I tell you what, that was not what we saw on the weekend. And I think this is a huge testament to the Wallabies. But I think that for the South African supporters and the Springboks, that's not where they want to be heading into Eden Park and like the New Zealand leg of their rugby championship. How do you kind of see that going? Because obviously we need as a Wallabies supporters, we need the All Blacks and the Springboks to be bashing each other. And I'm not saying that the New Zealanders are too hot flash at the moment either, particularly taking that historic first time loss in Argentina. But for the Springboks, how are you kind of seeing that? Because this could kind of shape how the Rugby Championship falls moving forward.
Well, we're beautifully positioned, aren't we? Everyone's got a win and a loss and between 6 and 4 bonus points in total, competition points rather. So it's set up beautifully. You're right about the revision and the reversion back to sort of 10-man block footy. I think they needed to. They just needed to get a win against Australia. It would have been pandemonium, proper toys out the cot stuff if they had lost. So they did what they needed to. Can you get away with that at Eden Park against the All Blacks? I'm not sure. But the way that the All Blacks back three has been operating, particularly the wings, haven't been so crash hot in the air and on the defensive side. So maybe that's the kind of tactic that they can apply. I think so much change like I said, with Colby coming back in and with Kane and Moody in the air. But they're really missing Leroux. I was expecting Willie Leroux to come in and steer the ship. It was a late withdrawal, and the step down from Leroux to Fassi is enormous. They need, if they can get Leroux back, they will have so much more incisiveness and decisiveness in attack is so important to that. So I think that's a big part of it. I really like the sort of unearthing, and I know he's been around for a little bit, but Marco van Staten's quickly becoming one of my favourite back rowers in world rugby because he's such a pain in the ass. Getting around the back of rucks, flicking people's legs up, running really nice blocking lines to stop attacking players. Like he knows the dark arts really well, so he's a big part of that. But if you can't write off the Boks, right? We're not going to be that surprised if the world champs do go to Eden Park and win off the back of this style of rugby. It's just not the kind that wins them and as many fans as they usually have at this point in time.
Yeah, no, we definitely can't count them out. And they are going to give the All Blacks a proper go at their home ground. And could we see another historical moment in the Rugby Championship happen this time around in New Zealand? So we'll wait and see what's going to go on there. We'll obviously wait on the Wallabies injury calls as well as the Springbok calls, because Peter Steph Toy and Sia Khaleesi are such important, crucial players for their team, leadership-wise and obviously on the field. I think what we're going to talk about now is just a little bit about, what could we see for the Argentina squad from a Wallabies perspective? We obviously have all these injuries. Are you expecting to see anyone else come in, or are we expecting to see a kind of consolidation and the same kind of squad be rolled out again?
I'm expecting a fairly similar squad. I think Fergo, this far down in the season, we've been through a Fiji game, a Lions series, and a South African tour. You don't want to tinker too much at this point. I don't think they necessarily need to. A couple of the key players we're looking to come back are players like James Slipper. That's a massive in once he's recovered from his HIA. And the sooner we can get him back on the park, the better, because his scrummaging was just superb. And I think he really helps Billy Pollard as well with that club combination. So him coming back in is a big in. How quickly we get Jake Gordon back in is going to be huge. Who knows how long we've got with Nick White, right? He was retiring in the third test. That was a pretty significant head knock that he got in the sling tackle from Quagga Smith. So it remains to be seen whether he'll come back into the mix quickly or not. I dare say that if Jake Gordon's fit and Nick White is iffy, we will see Ryan Lonergan finally get some game time, which I would really enjoy. But with the rotation in playmakers, people coming in and out, maybe they hold off a little bit because Lonergan doesn't have established combinations with the current playmakers. So I'm really interested to see what they do around that 9-10. But for me, the biggest question is one that you already raised. Who wears the 15? I'm desperate to get your thoughts on it because there's at least 4 people who are already in the squad, I think, that can wear the jersey. I'm just not sure what is best from a Wallabies growth mindset, as in who's able to cover the position for Tom Wright, who's had that lockdown since the start of 2024, and what's best to actually get wins in this rugby championship. So please, the floor is yours. I want to know who your 15 is.
I think there's a couple of school of thoughts that you can take. So you can take the excitement factor, and you can take the let's see how far this person can go, and that is Joseph Akuso Suoli. You could put him back there and see how he goes. That's not my take. That's not my opinion. That's not what I think should happen. But that is something that I'm seeing a lot about on socials, when I'm talking to people, and that is something they would like to see. Another option is, of course, Max Jorgensen, but a lot of people are saying, like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's meaning that he's playing so well on the wing that they don't want to see him moved to fullback and perhaps stunt or have to reset that sort of growth or rise pattern. So that's very interesting. Another player that comes into kind of the conversation is Jock Campbell, who's been there before from the Reds. Obviously, if you need to bring in cover, but I think the most logical and the kind of player that's going to bring the same level of experience that Tom Wright has is Andrew Kellaway. And we know that he's not necessarily the attacking threat, doesn't have the speed or the ability to jink as Tom Wright, but he does have a pretty good kicking game. He's very safe under the high ball. And obviously, we know that he can run those kind of support lines that would really help in the wide channels. And he did it for the Melbourne Rebels. He's done it for the Waratahs. He's able to find and pick the lines that really allow him to get outside of a defender, but then to be able to link out with the men quicker outside of him. So he is an extremely impressive player, and I just think that that is probably where you want to go. Some people are throwing in the likes of Matt Greeley, and I've forgotten how much of a stellar season he had. And I think that he'd be a really interesting player to take perhaps on the end of year tour. But I think for the Rugby Championship, you got to stick with the tried and tested. So for now, I think it's Andrew Kellaway. Is that kind of where your head is at the moment, or are you thinking something slightly different?
Oh, I think the journalist in me would love to see Suoleti wear the 15 and the obvious storylines and parallels to Falau and the possibilities of what you can do in attack as that tall aerial threat at 15. But Tom Wright's just been such a constant there. It's almost funny to think that we have a depth problem at 15. I think we do in Australia. We do have a depth problem as an out and out fullback because Tom Wright has been so far above everyone else. Even heading into 2023 and then gets pulled because Eddie cracks the shits with him. It was a fascinating thing to see him not go to France. And now we're faced with, do we put a firecracker like Suoleti at the back and let him rip? Or do we have the safe option? I agree with you, and I would put Kellaway there for obvious reasons. He is the most experienced back three option that we have at the moment. And should we persist with Toole, which I think we probably will against Argentina, unless you opt for a more physical Filippo Dalgunu to partner Jorgensen, for example, I think that Andrew Kellaway slots straight in, and then that keeps that continuity in the centres and across the rest of the back line. I would personally also love to see Paisami get a shot at 12 with Ikitau at 13, and then maybe that creates the Suoleti 15 option. But for the less movements, I think the better off Australia will be. And that's why I reckon Schmidt will go with AK for the RGs.
Yeah, no, I'm in total agreement. Just a couple of just going to go through kind of front row, second row, back row, halves, centers, and just rattle off a couple of names. I think that the strength of Zane Nongor, which I mentioned earlier, really means that perhaps Alan Alatoa doesn't need to be rushed back as quickly as perhaps he would have before. I was a bit unsure how he would go against the South Africans, but he actually held his side of the scrum quite well when he came on. So that's really reassuring. I think you can keep propping stocks exactly as they are right now, obviously with the inclusion of James Slipper. The hooking stocks, I don't see anyone necessarily coming in because we know Josh Nasser's in and around the team, kind of, been throwing a couple of balls here and there. We've got Matt Fessler, who's obviously got his calf injury, unfortunately. We've got Brandon Paying-Amoso, we've got Billy Pollard, but I can't really see any necessary addition of anyone in those stocks. The second row, we're just waiting and seeing and hoping that Will Skelton sticking around a little bit longer, because without him, then we start going to combinations that haven't had any minutes really. And if you start putting Williams and Frost next to each other, you go back all the way to the Fiji/the first British and Irish Lions game. And then who do you have coming off the bench? Lukan Salikoa hasn't played with this team as well. So that probably is something that needs to change during the Argentina leg. Even if Skelton's there, you probably need to start getting a couple of other combinations going. But apart from that, I can't see any particular change being made. Second row, back row, you're probably looking at a consolidation, if not an inclusion of someone like a Seru Uru, depending on where you see the likes of Gleeson and start seeing the likes of Tom Hooper contractually. I know that they're with us till the end of the year, but you have to start at some point, you have to start kind of planning for the future. So maybe an extra back rower joins just to be able to, get their head around the plays and get their head around the environment and the way the Schmidt wants to work it. Is there anyone in the forwards there that you see coming in or maybe dropping out? That's just kind of those are the machinations that I'm seeing in my head.
I think that's probably it for now. I was really pleasantly surprised to see Reece Van Neck included in the wider squad for South Africa because he's such a strong tight head scrummager, but I'm just not sure whether he'll get that opportunity because of the well-mentioned form of Nongor that you raised. He has impressed me a lot, and I'll probably add him to our stocks rising. I didn't expect him to put in the shifts that he did against South Africa, but kudos to him. The haircuts worked wonders, and he's doing really, really well keeping up his side of the scrum. So proud of that performance. I think if there's going to be any changes, it will be Uru coming in, maybe for the likes of a Josh Canham who's been in and around the squad. But for me, it's Skelton watch, right? That's the one we're all looking out for. How long does he stay with the team before O'Gara comes tapping on his 206 centimeter shoulder and says, "Come on back home, mate." We all want him to stick around, but that LSL swap is the clear like for like. I
Mm,
imagine should we lose Skelton for the Argentine series, Salako Loto comes in to start and Williams remains that cover off the bench, potentially with
mm,
an Uru also included if they need more line
mm,
out support. But I think the forwards is pretty steady around
mm.
that for me. The backs, there's so much more variation and change that we could see.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think that the inclusion of Dangunu was obviously in the original squad before he got injured in the First Nations Pacifica game. So that's not really an inclusion as per se, but that is a change to what we've seen on the field at least. Obviously the halves, I'd love to see Lonergan kept in the squad despite Gordon's fitness, and I would expect that White's going to be okay in 14 days, when we have to, or like 12 days when we have to play the Argentinians in Townsville. Um, I I do want to see him get on the field, and I think that we saw that perhaps a little bit of, again, this is why Nick White and Jake Gordon's are starting games. It's just about that tactical element with having their core skills absolutely nailed on. And then in the halves, in the fly half position, we've talked about that already. So I don't think we'll see any change there. We'll stick with Tane, we'll stick with Jock, we'll stick with Donaldson, depending on what his adductor strain is doing, and then obviously so sticking with Liner in the centers. I'm Fluke's been in and around the squad as a bit of a utility cover. I'd still like to see a David Feliwai brought in for a center specialist cover. I'm just a little bit unsure that Fluke is the right kind of player to have um, as that center wing cover. I mean, he does do that utility quite well, but again, it's how are you going to use him and what are you going to use him for? I just think with Feliwai, he's a bigger center type, and I think that's maybe perhaps where we are a little bit strained. But I know we've lost a couple of wingers, but I think the form of Corey Toole, Andrew Kellaway, obviously, unfortunately, we lost Peach, but we have a lot of informed wingers. Unfortunately, a couple of them have dropped in Potter and Dylan Peach. So you probably keep Fluke in the squad, but nothing too much changed. I think just positionally, they might bring in an extra person. Perhaps it is Mac Greeley or a Jock Campbell, but I can't think of too many people who would necessarily come in to be able to be a utility cover. So that'll be interesting to watch. That is the Wallabies wrapped, and it is now to talk all about the girls who've got their first game, their first win in the Rugby World Cup in England, and it is a thumping 73-0 against Samoa. This was a scoreline, not I didn't expect a scoreline like this, but I definitely did expect the Wallaroos to win, and I'm very glad that they managed to do it in absolute stellar fashion. So, what can you tell us about this game, Lockie? Because on paper, it looks pretty brutal.
Yeah, Fergo, I'm flying high. I'm rocking the Wallaroos cap today. We're absolutely cloud nine after a record World Cup win for the girls. So previously, their best performance came back against South Africa in 2006 from memory. But this blew it out of the water. 11 tries, three to Desi Miller, a couple of braces to Amosa Talakai, and I believe Caitlin House. And Cecilia Smith with the game of her life at 12. So really strong performances across the board. Yes, we expected a bonus point win, but the manner in which Australia performed and were so ruthless early doors was very impressive. So too, keeping a clean sheet. I think that's probably the most important part of this game as well, because Samoa, they've got some big runners, some physical carriers on the goal line, but Australia's back row, particularly Piper Duck and Emily Chancellor, really stood up, 26 tackles each, a couple of crucial steals as well. So lots of things to really take out as positives from this game, but it's an entirely different challenge coming up against the US next week, Virgo.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And we're going to head to that game in just a moment. But what I will say about the girls is that I've spoken with Lane Morgan recently, and we've been listening to their press conferences. Joe Yap, their coach, is an extremely defensive orientated coach. And that just as goes to your words, keeping a clean sheet with threats that the Samoans have, that is an extremely impressive feat. And like you mentioned, Cecilia Smith in the centers carrying 13. That's an all high for the Wallaroos and the likes of the line breaks. You've got Desiree Miller and Caitlin Hulse and Maya Stewart, sorry, just absolutely ripping it up out wide. And they combined really nicely. So you saw Stewart working with Miller, and it's something that they have clearly worked on, because I think the wings spent quite a little bit of time apart in the last time they played. So that was the Wales game here in Sydney when they won quite convincingly. But they seem to just be able to get that flow, and they've actually earned the right to go wide. And now they're finally getting that kind of pay. Obviously, it's going to be a completely different game against the US, who were absolutely spanked by the English. What can you tell us about that game? Because obviously it was 69-7, and it's just the way that the English were able to dominate up front, as well as apply their tactical nous and to be able to get some width in the game, was just unstoppable. The English props were on a different level, and it was just amazing to see what they could do at set piece time, but likewise in the loose.
Yeah, women against girls in that World Cup opener, it was amazing. The performances, you mentioned the props, and rightly so. Hannah Bodeman at loose head is one of the toughest ball runners in world rugby at the moment, and her scrummaging was second to none. Her and Maud Muir just wiped Hope Rogers and that experienced US front row clean off the park. I think you might have the stats in front of you, but I counted at least 5 scrum penalties, and at 2 tight heads, they were brutal. In the close quarter exchanges, but so too out wide. There's a very experienced US centre pairing of Aleph Kelter and Alona Ma, and Meg Jones at 13 came in up front, chopped them so hard and was so hard on the ball, she really stamped her mark. Then you've got players like Ellie Kildon at fullback, who was just pulling off miraculous plays, nutmegging opponents, bouncing the ball off their knee, couple of tries, couple of assists, 5 line breaks. This is a Red Roses team that came out firing. So it sets up an interesting sort of battle now. The Wallaroos coming off the high of Samoa, even though the scoreline doesn't show how tough those carries were and a lot of the work the Wallaroos had to do. It's a different prospect and a different preparation to what the US had, which was their toughest game of the pools against England. I'm interested to get your take on what you'd rather. Would you rather face a really hard opponent heading into this crunch game, or have the confidence of getting everything right against Samoa?
I think I'm going to qualify my answer with saying that speaking with Piper Duck and also Lane Morgan ahead of the tournament, they spoke a lot about mental headspace and being positively honed in on what they're trying to achieve with their game plan, and also being really present in the moment and being able to apply and execute the game plan. And I think that for this Wallaroos team, a win like that is only going to kind of put some more wind in their sail to ensure that what they're doing is working well. And to feed that confidence back into this wider squad to be able to make sure they're prepping really hard for this USA clash. I don't think necessarily a loss because they already experienced that kind of dynamic with Wales earlier in the year, just last month, really. So I think that coming off a win for them is absolutely going to be great for them. And they're not going to be under any illusion that the USA are going to be easy. They've played them earlier in the year, so they're going to be very aware about what the USA are going to bring and what they can bring on their day. And Wallaroos just have to make sure that they're on their game. But I think that what has been a really good growth for the Wallaroos is what we mentioned is defense, but particularly forwards work, because that is somewhere where they've been outmuscled in the past. But now they've got such a good squad and they've got good depth. And as you've written about on rugby.com.au, the experience. So how do you see that this Wallaroos side is going to face up against the USA?
I think we're well positioned as an Australian unit. I think, like you mentioned, the experience. You've got 10 girls with 30 plus caps. The experience of Ash Masters and Trill with 40 each. This is the most experienced squad they've ever assembled. So with a couple of recent wins over the States as well, they got an important win in 2023 over in America, and they got an important win in Canberra most recently this year. So it's going to be tough. They're evenly matched. The USA forwards have probably had the number on them in the past, and we've been reliant on Dizzy Miller, Charlotte Caslick in the most recent game, and our wingers to really strike. But this game against Samoa, and particularly the build-up against Wales, showed that Australia's forwards do have punch. When Tabua Tuinaka-Vadra is your least carrying and least impactful back rower, you know that something's going very right for Chance, for Duck, for Masters. So that's a great sign for me. Leanie's work, Caitlin Leanie, that is the new co-captain with them Chance for the Samoa game. Brilliant work nullifying the Samoan lineout, which was, rusty is probably a nice way to describe how Manasina ran their set piece. But her ability to pick lineouts off is really important. And there's plenty of go forward in a scrum with Feliki Pahiva and Eva Kapani. So I think we're in a good position to get the win against the US. And we must. We know that this is the crunch game. This is the one that matters most. So I can see the girls throwing the kitchen sink at the US. They'll do the same to us. But if we can nullify the impact of Kate Zachary at the breakdown, their captain, and if we can take Alev Kelter out of the game either by really good defence and burying her in rucks or by rolling her up and getting her sent off as she's wont to do, I think the Australians are going to have a really good crack at this.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed that we're switched on, we're ready to go, and we give it our all, because this really could dictate about who goes through in the through the pool stages into the final series, because it's the runner-up and the first placed in the pools that go through. So we really do need to make sure that we win this game against the USA coming on up. But I think what is particularly interesting is that England have the ability to rotate, and because they are such a professional outfit, that is an extremely big advantage to them. And I think that's a really important thing to remember, that when we're watching this, we are watching teams with huge disparity in resources, in professionalism, in what their athletes are paid, and how often they can be the elite athletes. So whilst you're watching this Rugby World Cup, just remember that the scorelines aren't necessarily reflective of the skill of the athletes. It's very much got to do with resourcing and the like. So keep watching, keep supporting, keep sharing all the content of the Women's World Cup, so we can get all the teams to be professional and to be paid, and to be paid what they're worth and what they should be getting paid. So for the home World Cup in 2029 for the women in Australia, we will make sure that our product is even better and bigger, because this right now in England, the Women's World Cup, is already smashing records, and we are hoping for more to be smashed as the progress of the tournament goes on, because that is ticket sales, that is attendance, that is eyes on the game. It's just amazing, isn't it, Lachie? Like, we are just absolutely blown away by how well received this Rugby World Cup is being received in England.
Yeah, this is the movement, right? In 2025, it got so much groundswell in 2022 with the delayed World Cup in New Zealand, the Ruby Tuis of the world bringing it to the world
Mm,
stage, that amazing final. But this is different gravy, Virgo. And you only
mm,
need to look at the games, even those teams that are under-resourced, that are hugely disadvantaged, like Spain. The crowd was on their feet at York as they scored the last try against the Black Ferns. It's having me tearing up watching at home what it means, seeing Fiji go the length of the field against Canada, watching
amazing.
the efforts of Brazil against South Africa. There are beautiful teams giving it their all at this tournament. So make sure you jump on, support it on free to air when the Wallaroos rather are playing. Get around them on Stand Sport, because each of these games has something magnificent to share. I mean, where else do you see a Canadian fullback scoring 6 tries in 20 minutes? These are unbelievable individual displays. It's just wonderful so far. And we're only one round in. It's going to get better from here.
And there are a lot of people coming to this, even not from rugby. So from all around the world, they're coming in, and they're seeing these women, they're seeing these influential people being as part of this. Like, you got the owner mayors of the world, but you've also got a lot of the English players as well as some of the Australian players. And you're just going out there for goodwill to be able to support them. And then you might not get the game of rugby in the first game, you might not get in the second game, but I tell you what, the third game, you start understanding things, and then you realize that you've enjoyed every single minute up until the point where you understand why they've kicked the ball, and why they've caught the ball, and why they've, or all of a sudden, the 8 of the biggest players have chucked heads against each other in what we call a scrum. So, if you're on here just kind of getting onto the whole rugby wave, and the Women's World Cup is your first taste of it, I think that is a really easy way to pick up the game, because it is so entertaining, and we are only going to see bigger and better matches as the tournament goes on. So make sure that you subscribe to all the Rugby World Cup account on Instagram, and TikTok, and everywhere where you consume your media. Make sure that you start consuming a little bit of and sharing it along, so that we can continue to grow the hype and the strength and the amazing talent of the athletes. But Lockie, you and I are hoping for a continuation of the Wallaroos' strength, and we need them to beat the USA to be able to pretty much guarantee their second spot there in the pool, and then going through the pool stages into the finals. No rugby from the men's side in this weekend, so it's all about the Wallaroos. We've obviously got club competitions wrapping up here in Sydney, so make sure that you get down and watch the grand final between Warringah Rats and Easts. It's going to be an absolute belter. And then I'm not sure what the schedule is like in Brizzy. Is it wrapping up this weekend in Brizzy, Lockie?
Yeah, sure is. It's Founders Cup for the women and Hospital Cup for the men. They are both Bond University featuring in that one. Brothers are defending their Hospital Cup crown against the Bull Sharks, and it's the Bull Sharks defending their women's title against the Tigers at Ballymore. So get down for those if you're around Brizzy at Ballymore. And that shoot shield decide is going to be a cracker. Do you back in your Rats?
Yeah, mate, absolutely. Backing my Rats all the way home. We're going to get it done, even though that the East's been looking very strong in the back half, and obviously they are the reigning champions. So we're just going to have to bite down hard and go for the full 80. But to all of you guys out there, please enjoy your rugby throughout the week. Continue to support the Women's World Cup as it gets underway. And for Lachie, you and I, we're going to keep an eye out for that Wallabies team drop later in the week. But until then, everyone enjoy your rugby and take it easy.